Please be seated. Would you pray with me a moment? Open my lips that my mouth might show forth your praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So have you ever wondered about the psychology of God? I can tell you that I never did until I was in a class on prayer in seminary. Until that moment, God was, well, just God, right? Perfect, above it all. Certainly above psychology. I mean, psychology was for psychotics, right? Folks like us. Now, as many of you may know, I left a career in academia to go to seminary in my mid-30s. And my only goal to go to seminary was to learn how to love God with my whole heart, my whole soul, my strength, and my entire spirit. Because one Sunday in church, I had an epiphany that I had no idea what any of that meant. I didn't have the foggiest notion about loving God in that way. And I had been a lifelong Christian. I went to church most Sundays. I was active, and I did not have the foggiest notion. I felt somehow that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So when I got to seminary, I signed up for courses on prayer and spirituality. That was my major because I wanted to get good at both of those things. I had no idea what getting good meant, but I figured that if I got good at prayer and spirituality, somehow I would figure out how to love God with my whole heart. So there was this one class on prayer, and in the middle of it was a section called The Psychology of God. Now, just so you don't misunderstand, we didn't have God on a couch and ask God for free associations about God's childhood, particularly its traumatic moments, or God's dreams, or God's relationship with God's mother, which, of course, as we all know, is the root of all of our problems. No, it was how our individual psychologies, our childhood, our goods and our traumatics, the environments that shaped us, our relationship with our parents, our worldview, like, for me, is the world safe or dangerous? Is it good or competitive? These are things that we get from our parents and how they saw the world. And all of that shapes our ideas about God. In fact, the professor's thesis was, that matters much more than what it says in the Bible, and much more than how Charlton Heston portrayed him in the movies. That if your father was kind and loving, then it's easy for you to imagine a kind and loving God. But if your father was harsh and punitive, well, that's how you imagine God to be. If your childhood was one of scarcity and competition, well, that's how life is. The same with abundance and generosity. The same with your mother. But because, as I said before, the language in the church has traditionally been about God as Father, with lots of he's and his's, and traditionally masculine attributes, this is one of the places where we look to our fathers. Take our lesson for this morning. It's a perfect illustration. There's a man who has two sons. And as I said a moment ago, neither of them really knows their father. The younger son sees his father as money bags, right? From whom he wants to get away from as soon as possible. Get the money, go to Vegas, right? And then when that blows up on him, even though his father has given him everything he had coming, he expects harshness. Treat me like a slave. I don't deserve to be your son. He expects judgment. And then the older son, who when we meet him is out in the field working for his father, he's doing his duty. But that's how he sees his father, a guy he works for. He's not a father that he can talk to. He's resentful of his father, that his father isn't harsh with the younger brother. How come you're having a party? Why don't you slap him? Sounds so true, doesn't it? I myself have a very complicated relationship with my father. I grew up in a place just like Dover, and we had a very comfortable life with all kinds of privileges and opportunities, except that my parents really weren't suited to be married to each other. So everything was always slightly incongruent. I was trying to find a word to describe what it is. Both this and that at the same time, or this striving with that in our home. My parents, in other words, because they came from very different worlds, were never on the same page. And my father, who grew up in the 1930s, so during the Depression, during the Second World War, came from an emotionally distant world. Many of you might remember your fathers or grandfathers. Not hugging, not talking, not doing that kind of thing. That was the world they came out of. Now, that's not to say that I don't have fond memories of my childhood. I have very fond memories of sitting on my father's lap and him reading me stories after supper, or taking us to the Y on Friday nights to go swimming, and then we'd pick up pizza and go home. 1960s pizza was like, wow, we're going to have pizza. Not like today at all. And my father loved to tell silly jokes, silly jokes, and we'd hear them a million times and we'd all laugh every time. But then when I became a teen, my relationship became very painful because my parents divorced. And our life, my mother and the kids, our life became hard, emotionally and financially. And because of that, I had no relationship with my father for 25 years. He went his way, I went my way. 25 years. And then I have a relationship with him now, the last 15 years. And I got back together with him because my wife shamed me into it. She said, you get up every Sunday and talk about forgiveness, but you're not practicing it in the one place that's most difficult for you in your life. And your sons deserve to know their grandfather. And she was right? That's why you get married, to have that mirror right in front of you from which you can't hide. And also, I'm no fool, right? I took psychology classes. You got to lay the pain to rest. You can't carry that stuff. It's important to do it in this life, not on your deathbed. Lay it all down and move on so that you can learn how to live differently without dragging that ball and chain, without carrying those burdens on your back, without that anger and that fear. And it takes time because over the course of a lifetime, we get habituated to living a certain way and thinking a certain thing. But in that class on prayer and the psychology of God, I realized that I had had a really lucky break as a kid, and that my idea of God did not depend wholly upon my idea of my father, because both my mother and my mother's mother were what I learned in seminary are called mystics. It sounds like a huge word. They didn't think of themselves that way, but they experienced God. Blah, 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 dogma, 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 blah, 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 bad preacher, bad preacher, bad preacher, blah, 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 sitting in pews. This was not their thing. They went, but this is not their thing. Church often bored them, but God was really present to them. They would say, if church was good. Like if a church was good, whatever their good was, it moved them and they met God. But when they were at the ocean, or they were digging in their gardens, or walking in the woods, or at a museum, or reading poetry aloud, or listening to music, Ella Fitzgerald, there was God. And both of them, God bless them, took the time with me as a little boy to show me, to tell me, to help me see, to give me words to describe what it was that they were showing me. And so I realize, even though I didn't at the time, that my God was infinitely beyond one lone man who I call Dad. My God was like the God in the story this morning, running down the path towards me with open arms, who says to the older son, everything that I have has always been yours. And welcome back, son. Let's have a party. Mysterious and wonderful, intimate and caring, majestic and astounding. Which brings me to the point of this Father's Day sermon. First, and this goes for men and women and everyone, not just fathers. If you want a child to know God, to have a positive, adventurous, intriguing relationship with an unconditionally loving God, it's not about bringing them to church. It's not about teaching them how to read the Bible. It's not about explaining theology. It's about one thing and one thing only. It's about modeling. You have to do what Jesus said. You have to live love and mercy, show forgiveness and justice, be kind and compassionate. And if you have a mystical bent yourself, which I know some of you do, then you got to get down in the dirt and the sand and the water and help your child see what you see, hear what you hear, feel what you feel, know what you know. And then second, and perhaps most importantly, something that I came to in the last 15 years of my life when I reconciled with my father, and I say it every communion, I say it when I lead the confession, whatever happened in the past is past. You've got to let it go. It's worth going to a psychiatrist and understanding what it means and the effect it had, but it's not worth dwelling on. You got to let go. Because the most important thing I realize about my mother and father is not that they made a mistake getting married. And not that in their marriage they created a lot of havoc for 4 kids and themselves. The most important thing is that they gave me the gift of life. Everything essential about me I owe to them. And what I do with it, I owe to God. And for that, I give thanks both to my Father and to God. And I think you should too. Amen.